Hello, I'm Shawn. He's Teos, and you know what that means. This is another episode of Mastering Dungeons. Hey, Teos, I decided to switch up the intro there a little bit.
Yeah,
How's it going?
it's great. This has been a interesting weekend for me where we were picking carpets, and this was because I made the mistake of saying to
Hmm.
my wife, "You know what would be easy rather than all of these things we've been talking about? What we want to do to shake up our house is just get like one of those carpets, replace a carpet we have with another carpet." I thought that would be easy. It has led down the carpet rabbit hole. It is.
Mm.
We have so many swatches and things in our room, and nothing makes sense, and I don't even know what is anymore. So I'm gonna end up with like fuchsia or something. I have no idea. It's totally confusing. We're driving each other mad. Send help.
Yep. Just when you get it, just you lie on it and you just rub your face on it. That
Okay.
so I've heard. So I've heard. Of course, I do that with most everything, so I have to be careful.
That's a good tip. That's one for the kids.
Yes, yes. Speaking of tips,
Oh,
we do take listener questions and we try to answer them as only we can, which is sometimes intelligently and sometimes
hmm.
not.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see how it goes this week when we take a question first from the mighty Jerd via our Patreon Discord, who asks, "How do you drive a story game when the players are reticent to bite on the hooks you give them? I'm trying to figure this out with my current group. They've been unraveling a large conspiracy, which they're heavily invested in. And this last session, they recovered a diary with an exposition dump, giving them not only a location of operations for this elusive cult, but also the names of some of their leadership and direct links to the conspiracy they have been chasing this whole time. Me gives the PCs a diary detailing locations of the cult, its lieutenants, and major plot beats. PCs, boy, that sounds dangerous. We can't tangle with an whole encampment. Let's wait for an NPC faction we've been working with to clear it out instead. It could not be any clearer unless I labeled the name of the keep the cult is operating out of. Go here, Castle.
That's
And
not a bad idea.
I feel you there, mighty Jared. I feel you. Uh, this is actually quite a common problem, and this is why when you publish an adventure, play testing is so important. People say, "Well, how do you play test an adventure? Why do you play test an adventure?" It's not really about the encounter balance because, especially at mid or high levels, there is no such thing as encounter balance in most adventures. You can look for the most egregious stuff. What's most important is seeing if the flow of the adventure makes sense. And something like this is something that you can pick up in a playtest. Now, obviously, for your home game, you're not playtesting it. You're just presenting it to the players. But this is one of those important things. And it leads to the importance of not just where in an adventure plot, but how, when, and why. Knowing that they are supposed to go somewhere is part of the task, but giving them a compelling, immediate, and necessary reason to go is just as important. And in this case, they may know where to go, but if unless there's a compelling reason to go right now, or some hints about the best way to get there,
Mhm.
then there may be some hesitation, as in this case. What do you think, Teos?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that, there are a couple answers I could give to Mighty Jared. It's an excellent question. And I've played in his games. So I know he runs a good game. You could really just label it "Go Here, Castle" and just be like, there you go, players. Like I've done it for you. Now you don't have any questions.
Mm-hmm.
But the other way to do it is like you're kind of saying is there must be something that says to players who are cautious, as this group clearly is, there is a way for this to work, right? And we've all seen movies
Mm-hmm.
or novels, but especially movies and TV shows where the heroes, the protagonists, they do things that you're like, you would never try that. What are the chances you would get through the evil Nazis to get to the thing? Like that would just never work, but they try it anyway. And it's just cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
An adventures league or organized play
Mm-hmm.
adventures for any kind of game will often do this, where you just go through the scene because that's what you know you have to do, and it's a convention adventure. But in a home game, I think that's especially where it can fall apart, where your players will go, this doesn't make sense. Like, I don't know why I would think I could take on this evil cult. And so it's not just saying, here's the go here castle, but, and by the way, you might be able to get in. So maybe there's something that you could add, like a timetable, right? Like the notes, the information includes the guard shifts or where the guard shifts can be found, or, and make sure that everybody's at the north gate for the shipment of ore that's coming in or whatever. Something that gives them a little bit that go, wait, they're going to be over here. We might be able to go to that other side, right? Or, need to get more guards for the rear entrance, right? Once your players are cautious and that they won't just assume they'll survive, because some players do, right? Some players are like, everything's always balanced, CR encounters, I'm going in, especially if you have GMs. But players may be scared, like I was as a player when I first started. And that's where you need that kind of extra, some extra hooks that gives them that real, this is plausible, this can be done, there is a way.
Yep. And part of what Teos is describing here is sort of giving the players agency while not giving them agency. You're giving them the illusion of agency, right? You don't want to say you have to go here castle or the adventure is just going to fall apart. But what you do is you say, not only you give them that schedule that Teos is talking about, you give them the tools that they need. So it's their idea, not your idea.
Yeah, right. And that's the hardest part, right? That balance. That is exactly the hardest part, especially in a home game where things are often looser and you're playing off of your players. It's extremely difficult. But that's where you want to know what their friction points are. And on the Discord, I sort of said, I wonder if there's one of the players that you could take aside, someone you feel close to, and you could say, hey, when I gave you guys these clues, I thought you guys were just going to go straight in there, but you didn't. What was it that really kind of made you pull back? And because the more you can understand their friction points, you can balance sort of their friction, their worries against the compelling factors that you can put in. And you can do a number of things, right? Without spoiling, you can do things like add a time pressure, right? We will, the ritual will begin in one day. So you don't have time to get to the other factions for help or go back to the king and request, that the princess come along with you as an extra guard or whatever. All these kinds of factors, you force their hand a bit. The caravan heads out in an hour, right? Whatever. And then, let's sneak onto the caravan. That's got to be the way in, let them figure it out, but with that urgency.
Yeah. The old trope of starting the campaign with the characters being prisoners and with no equipment, and this is a similar thing, right? If you don't want to do it, like in Out of the Abyss, and I knew my players would be okay with it, but I didn't want to put them in that position. So we had a pre-session where they were approached by the Harpers, who said, listen, we know that there is this prison ring in the Underdark, and they're starting to come under the surface to take people. What we need you to do is pose as captives to be captured and taken, so you can be taken into the very heart of the operation, and then you can get out and let us know what's going on, where these factions are, where the prisons are, etc. And that put the agency back in front of the players. Okay, now we will help you create a false skin on your back where you can hide your thieves' tools. Cool. And you can use magic that we give you to secure a dagger somewhere, so you have weapons and you have the tools that you need, the basics at least, so when you do escape, you'll be able to survive better. And that turns it all on its ear, and it makes it much more palatable and even fun. Right now, it's our choice to be captured and have to fight our way out with less equipment than we normally would. So put the agency in the player's hands. Yeah.
No, it's great. I'm marveling at your technique, and you talked about this before, but it's still like that idea of like the sneaking the weapons on. It's really easy to think, well, the whole point is to be weaponless, but really you give most character classes a dagger, and they're in the same situation of feeling quite weaponless. until they get their hands on, enemy weapons and stuff. So it's really the same thing, but you're giving them that agency that they really want, and they're going in with a plan. Yeah, and maybe that's the thing for a group like this, is to say that, to have the faction, in fact, be on hand and say, we can't send people fast enough. We need you to go in, but here's something, we could do one of the following things to help you. Which do you want?
Right. Yeah. And it makes it more organic, even though there's still manipulation happening on the part of the game master as the storyteller. But it's a manipulation that is much more palatable and spurs the imagination of the players. How do you think you could sneak weapons in? How do you think that you could take advantage of some chaos there? And let them push the story in the direction that they want, making them feel good about it.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe it's something like, if they want to work with factions, just to say that you could, something like, I could spare a couple people to mount a distraction. What do you want and where? And just something loose like that, right? Yeah.
Yep. Adds a new dimension to the game. Helps even with world building on the character's part, because they can, say, we really need this. And then you as a DM say, oh, sure, there is that there, and you can make use of it. Good all around, good for everyone. So thank you, Mighty Judd, for that wonderful question. And we will get to now a question from Selden Harry via YouTube. What games do you recommend for new GMs? 5e excluded. This is a tough question. I have been wrestling with this a lot recently. So many role-playing games, whether they admit it or not, and very few actually do admit it, these games rely on a game master who already sort of understands role-playing games. The basic concepts, the flow, the game loops. And I've tried to evaluate role-playing games on their friendliness to brand new players and game masters, but I already know role-playing games, and that negative capability that I need to remove the knowledge from my head to evaluate it is difficult to do. So what I have done recently is look at complicated board games in the role-playing game sphere to see if those would be better stepping stones for new game masters. So take a game like Gloomhaven or Hero Quest or Mansions of Madness or Time Stories, where some of them can have a game master, some of them don't, but you could still act as a game master to help the players navigate the rules. What this gives you as a game master is experience in keeping track of several things at once while watching players' reactions to things. Because at its heart, that's what role-playing games are, right? You're just juggling different aspects of a game while also taking feedback. And if you can keep a mind on the rules and keep a mind on the players, then you've gone a long way to learning how to GM. So sometimes a board game like that helps get the basics under your belt before you move on to a more free-form sort of role-playing game experience. What do you think, Teos?
I thought about this question and I wanted to arrive at an answer, and I really didn't. I don't know if it's better to start with any number of games I could choose from, or to just run D&D or whatever. I don't know. It's a good question. I would be curious if you could somehow study, take 3 DMs and put them through, one of them starts with Fiasco and one of them starts with, Apocalypse, and another one starts with D&D, and then have them all run D&D later. Is one of them particularly better at running D&D or whatever your game of choice is? Someone else starts with Shadowrun, I don't really know. I suspect that it has an impact, but it might vary so much on so many other factors. I don't know that there is a perfect game to start with. And in general, it should, you're going to be, the other problem is generally someone who's starting to DM, they have a game they want to run. That's why they're here. They're like, wow, this looks so cool. I want to run this. Or I just played this and I want to be a DM too, which I've seen many times. So that's the game they want to run. And so if it's, Pathfinder second edition, doesn't matter how complex it is, that's the game they want to run. And what I tend to think is that a big part of it is really the scenario you start with. And whether a starter set or whatever, there's some good clear on-ramp that really can help you be a good DM. And I've seen that, there was one that Chris Tulloch put together one year where he just took one of the 4E intro starter set type adventures and he just wrote up a script for it where it was just really, and I've talked about this before, but it was just really simple, like roll some skills, then we're going to do a really quick, easy combat. And it just put you through the paces in a way that was very easy to feel capable and accomplished as a GM, no matter how new or old you were. You just felt good because everything was handheld. The adventure was speaking to you and telling you what to do. It was like an instruction manual. And so it all worked. And it wasn't the best scenario. And in fact, that was the part that I was sort of concerned about. I was like, I don't know, this is a very compelling story or scenario. But the truth is, players were having fun. As I watched all these tables and all these GMs running this, it was going really well. And I think every GM felt very supported because that scenario was doing that job of getting you on your first run.
And if the game master's already familiar with sort of the flow of role-playing games, sometimes the game master gets caught lacking or wanting of experience with sort of group storytelling. So there are games like Once Upon a Time or Rory's Story Cubes that help you become just a storyteller and learn to tell stories based on prompts. So games like that, the more storytelling, just sitting and telling a story one sentence at a time with a group of people, and you go around the table and everyone adds that's part of what role-playing games are. So getting some experience doing that in a very simple way can be nice. And there's also a ton of like one-page RPGs out there. Honey Heist and Lasers and Feelings and The Terrible RPG can help be a stepping stone between not knowing anything and being able to understand how to connect rules to stories in a sort of simplified way.
Or even if you're, as I used to, before my kids could play D&D, I would take their bedtime story time. And sometimes we would do a sort of adventure. And I would say, tell me who you are. Are you the powerful wizard of the kingdom? Are you the fighter? Are you a cunning rogue? And they'd be like, oh, I'm the wizard. Great. The queen comes in and asks you for your help on an important quest, to go do this thing. What do you take with you? And just, off you go, right? And that kind of just collaborative joint thing. And of course, the trick is always having your kid think that you know what you're doing. When you don't, welcome to parenting and storytelling. But that's exactly the fun of it, right? And that is actually a very good training wheels for this kind of thing.
Yeah. So sorry we didn't have a very specific recommendation for you, Selden Harry, but that's about as good as we can do based on our experiences at the moment. So thank you for the question.
Not
now
Cinnabar.
Let's get to our news and commentary section. No. Getting to our news and commentary section, starting with a very, very special anniversary-ish time. D&D is 50 years old in 2024. What day? Historians argue. Some say it happened yesterday. We record on a Monday. Some say it happened on the 28th of January, 1974 being the first publication of the original D&D game. Others give other dates. We're going to just treat the whole year like one big special anniversary because that's what Wizards is doing. They're like, yeah, we're going to get this edition out to celebrate the anniversary, even if we're releasing it on December 31st at 11:59 p.m. It's the 50th anniversary. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's two thoughts. One is, on that historical side of it, John Peterson did a bunch of research. We talked about this. I forget if it was last year, or the year before last, but this has come up. When is the birthday?
Yeah.
And John Peterson said it was the last Sunday in January, which would have been, the 28th this month, this year. Shannon Appelkline has a nice blog on his designersanddragons.com, dashes on either side of the end, website. And he talks about the kind of history of researching this. And more importantly, and the part that I really loved about this and why I think turning 50 maybe, really does mean something, is he really talks about how the game has evolved and all of the people who've shaped it and names them and their various advancements. And that really is the beauty of the fact that this game is 50 years. It's both a remarkable date that the game can be this old and be in its prime. I say that as somebody who's turned 50 already. And just that so many people have had a hand at it, right? Any number of people we could name that are just legends for the things they've contributed to the game. And then the many people that maybe their accomplishments aren't known who've also contributed, and the communities that have done that and kept the game alive and going and expanding. And that's the part that I think, is a really nice guide for what to think about, not just yesterday, but the whole year, is just what does it mean for you for the game to turn 50, and what are all the things we're thankful for around that? I think that's a really nice guide for the year.
Yeah, it is. And I'm sure as the year progresses, we will be speaking to all of those topics as we get retrospectives and other pieces of media that talk about D&D and what turning 50 means to games and people and so on. What D&D means to some people is virtual reality, not just in the stories that you tell, but the actual technology. And Resolution Games has announced that it is working with Wizards and Hasbro to create a licensed virtual reality game set in the D&D universe. If Resolution Games sounds familiar to you, it's because they have already created previously a VR-based D&D inspired game called DBO. And Wizards has partnered previously with the now out of business VR platform AltSpace VR to create a virtual reality tabletop play space. It'll be interesting to see how this all goes. Your thoughts?
I remember seeing in fact, it was interesting to read this story because I was like, what happened to that virtual reality table space that I remember seeing a fun demo for? Oh, okay, it died. That's what I learned as part of this article. And it's funny because the first time I heard about this particular story was in the context of what is D&D doing? What's Wizards doing? Kind of like, the outrage angle. And it's like, it's just a license to a company which may or may not be able to pull this off in some way that's really compelling for people. It's nothing wrong, right? It's like seeing a golden book on a shelf or anything else. Like, hopefully this is another thing that reaches a lot of people and gets them interested in D&D. It's not the future of the game or the industry changing dramatically, at least not yet.
Remember in the 80s and 90s and even 2000s where it was theorized that everything was going to be virtual reality.
Oh, yeah.
Schools, every student would have a virtual reality headset and they would be learning by manipulating numbers and by doing things that they wouldn't be able to do in a classroom otherwise. And we all waited for our virtual reality headgear to arrive and our virtual reality entertainment to happen. And now it's 30, 40 years later, and virtual reality hasn't necessarily made a dent in the entertainment life of practically anyone.
Yeah, despite a lot of money being spent.
I don't think I've ever put on a VR headset.
Yeah, I did. It was fine. I did it at PAX. There were a couple of demos one year at PAX that I tried headsets, and it's fine, but it's a lot of a lot of rigmarole, and at the end, sometimes these things are more complicated than they're worth, and it's not the heart of the experience, right? And anything D&D, I immediately question too much tech because the heart of the experience has never been about the tech. But there are other things where tech makes a lot of sense, and I embrace it wholeheartedly. But for me, pen and paper games are pen and paper games. So
Yeah. What we need is a VR game where you pretend you're holding a pen and rolling dice at the table.
Yeah,
Yeah. See,
yeah.
that's why I'm
Ooh,
paid the big bucks for these ideas.
let's just get
Yeah.
jetpacks.
Yep. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on this and see if somehow I feel like VR is a technology waiting for a killer app, and there
Mm,
hasn't necessarily been a killer app uh, that catches fire enough to make me run down to the store to buy the VR headset and do the thing.
right.
So I can't imagine that D&D will be that thing, but you never know.
Yep. I worry about our future of too if things get too immersive. Real world is immersive. I don't want to be a Luddite, but the
Mhm.
real world is immersive. It's great. Go out and walk in the forest, then go home and roll on a table.
There you
That's what I say.
go. Rub your face on the carpet.
There you go.
D&D Beyond has given us some information on what people play, stats for 2023. D&D Beyond, before it was owned by Wizards, used to share this data quite frequently. What are people's favorite classes? What are people's favorite feats and ancestries, and so on and so on. Uh, they've been a little tighter with the information since Wizards bought D&D Beyond, but they're giving us this. Teos, what are your thoughts, and what are some of the things that you learned when you looked at this?
It's almost like a joke about how people make like a bad graphs that you see one thing but you're seeing another thing. And there's this graph that shows this like stepwise drop of the different ancestries species that people have chosen. And at first you might look at it and think, okay, I get it. Like humans at just over 700K, elf number 2 at over 500K, dragonborn at an equal drop, except wait, the number for the Dragonborn is 200K, not 300. So like suddenly we've taken a different scale, but the numbers are all still equally
Uh,
distanced. And then Tiefling is next, half elf, dwarf, halfling, half orc. So that was interesting that it's like they almost tried to obfuscate their data. Like, what are they worried about? I don't get it. It's really strange. And so it's really hard to look at these graphs and make any sense of them other than just the order that they're in and maybe a few numbers here and there. They mentioned the fact that in Baldur's Gate 3, half elf was most popular. And here it's what, fifth or sixth, something like that. The top classes are, and it's again things we've heard before. The human is most popular, and very much so. Similarly, the fighter is the most popular class. Then it's the rogue, and then the barbarian. All of these show at over 300K, so you can't tell how close or far they are. The wizard, the paladin, the warlock, cleric, the ranger, the bard, the druid. Those are the next ones in order, all over 200K. Sorcerer and monk are 100K. An artificer just over 60K. Poor little artificer. Despite its broken little turret with 10 hit points, it still didn't get higher.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have silly things, what are the top character names? How many people called their character Bob? Different amusing things like that can be fun if you like that kind of thing. I would have loved better math here on some of these figures that people could have maybe used, but I guess that's what they were trying to prevent, and they wanted to this be a light piece. But still interesting that the usual assumptions and tropes that we've heard before are true. Human fighter. That's what people expect to play, right?
We go from virtual D&D to real life D&D? Maybe. The underground fortress of Chateau de Brazé is a real life dungeon or real life castle with dungeons. Tell us about this one, Teos.
Yeah, this was shared on our Patreon Discord, and I love it. It's an article on amusingplanet.com that shares pictures of a relatively small castle, less than 2 acres, in the famed Loire Valley of France. And the lord of the castle in the mid 16th century feared invasion and started building multiple tunnels, living spaces, storage areas, and other rooms built around the castle. And it's the kind of thing where the reason this was shared was because you often think, well, fantasy D&D dungeons, these are totally made up. There's no real life parallel of this. And there are more than 3 kilometers of tunnels in this Chateau de Brézé. And they had holes in corridors for shooting attackers, 60-foot deep moat, with all the underground areas accessible from the moat. There's these amazing pictures and schematics. And the funny thing about it is the castle was never attacked. Maybe because of the threat of, if you do attack, you got to deal with all of this. So don't.
Yep, you can check that out at amusingplanet.com. The 50th anniversary doesn't just bring us new rules, it brings us new minis, especially minis from WizKids, because they're releasing a blind box pre-painted mini set that includes first edition and 5th edition versions of the minis. Get Yankee, Louth, Vecna, Lemures, Kobolds, and more, all in contrasting versions to each other. And there's also apparently a 10 secret rare chase miniature set. How much does this set you back, Teos? You're the minis lover here.
It is an astounding $200. $200 for a brick of 8 booster boxes, which is a total of 32 minis. Each booster has 1 large, 3 medium or small minis. The boosters are $25 each. There's also a Red Dragon Special Mini that looks like the 1977 basic set cover. A mind-numbing $650 for that puppy. And someone said it's large. It can't be. It's got to be bigger than that. But I don't know. Whatever size it is, it's not enough to merit $650. The minis do look great. I mean, they do these like you'll have a Githyanki that's like 5e version and a Githyanki that is from the Fiend Folio version, right? And so you get these 2 comparisons, 2 Lolths, 2 Vecnas, and it's really very cool. So I love it. I absolutely want a full set. The prices are just bonkers, but it is really lovely. So there's a link there. You can see the shop.wizkids.com. You can pre-order it, or after you rob a bank, I guess.
Start saving up now. But before you save up, hear us out on our creator and crowdfunding corner. Who are we looking at this week? We're looking at the Mathemagician, backer of the show. On Mathemagician's WordPress site, they look at engaging with the ritual. A cool set of pictures with very interesting encounter design tied to them. What did Mathemagician do here for us, Teos?
It reminded me some of the wild 3D builds that Penny Arcade used to share on their blog. And I forget which of the two, whether it was Mike or Jerry, that would build these things, but just, like wild foam planets they'd battle on top of. And this is using styrofoam rectangles to make towers, then placing grids on the tops of them so that you can move minis on them, and elevation markings so you know kind of what the 3D distances are. Bridges with special ways across, and then they're summoning rituals and demons on top. And he had they took yarn representing power flowing from a ritual site, and the yarn was of different colors and sort of radiate out, making a sort of puzzle of like, should you be outside the blue or outside the red or between the two. So they had to sort of figure out this puzzle of the flow of energy coming out of a pit fiend conducting a ritual. And it's a really neat a visual, just that kind of thing that reminds you that, sometimes players will just love it when you just do bizarre stuff like this. Very inspirational. And if you like it, they also have an article on experimental system for travel and random encounters, which is also a recommended read.
Awesome. We have news from Daniel Fox. We've covered before on the show the Zweihander RPG, which was previously published through Andrews McMeel Publishing. When that connection was severed, we didn't know what would happen with Zweihander, but Daniel seems to have regained ownership of the role playing game and is now creating an updated version, which will be kickstarted. The Kickstarter is not live yet, but we have a link in the show notes where you can check in to subscribe to be notified when it does launch. So we're wishing Daniel good luck with that project. And finally, we have Hacking Across Editions, a post on rpg.net that compares how different role playing games handle the task of hacking computer systems. And you looked at this, Teos. So tell
Yeah.
me, what does this article do?
Well, it's a perfect segue from our VR story because it looks at how these different games compare, right? Different sort of cyberpunk type games across time, and how long it takes to do a hacking of the system, the role of the player versus the party, a lot of different factors like this. And there are kind of two big things that I took away from this. One is, there's this interesting look at the design approaches and how they enable good or bad play, how they separate the character out, the time they take, the concepts they're emulating, and that kind of thing. But second, how deeply those visions are derived from the state of computers when the game happens to be designed. So Shadowrun in 1999 and Cyberpunk's first versions, they have this whole thing with an emphasis on telephone lines. Very little, if anything, is wireless. The idea that you have to make a long distance call if you're going outside of your country, right? And there's extra stuff to do because of that. Heavy mainframe concept where you are moving, through these different lands and nodes, and it's all very Gibson inspired from Neuromancer. Things like whether you're using up RAM, so you have to move things from your RAM to your ROM, and whether disk space is being filled. And all of it is a battle through essentially a digital dungeon with IC being monsters and files as loot, right? And it's really interesting. The first Shadowrun, and they not only do they look at the rules, but they play a sample hack session with the assumption that you go on a run and the Shadowrunners make it through whatever, or the team makes it through whatever the first set of things are, and then the hackers supporting them. And how does that play? In the first edition run, the Decker in Shadowrun is sitting back at their home. The team is the one that's on site, and it takes 2 hours, or just over 2 hours, for the hacker to do their part of gameplay. So that's over 2 hours. Wow. Where the rest of the party is just, all the other players are just sitting there watching this happen, right? Shadowrun 4th edition is created in 2005. It assumes wireless systems and augmented reality. There's visual stuff, not quite virtual. It's overlaid on top of what you see normally. And it kind of then in 5th edition goes back a little more to the Neuromancer style, but with these modern elements like cloud computing. And the run time goes down to 15 to 30 minutes in 4th edition, 30 minutes in 5th edition. Cyberpunk Red, similarly, is around 30 to 40 minutes. They also play the more narrative Neon City Overdrive RPG and the Hardwired Island RPG, which have 15 minutes being more narrative. It's a really fascinating read. I enjoyed it. It's posts scattered throughout this thread, but it's a really fun read at both system and just how time has passed.
Awesome. And that, folks, is our first segment on Mastering Dungeons.